Today we're discussing Johnson's Guns in the Family. Love the way how I decided to get us going so early with something lovely and non-confrontational. No controversy here. When I do these videos going over readings, generally I'm going to look at the subject and look at some jumping off points. And the goal here is to try to give you some idea as to how you can actually use some of this information when you're making your own arguments. But for Johnson, since we're looking at this one fairly early, I think it's probably a better idea to use this as an example of how you can take a subject that you're interested in and use it to narrow down to a specific point that readers can get to. In other words, how are you going to approach big topics? Johnson has the answer. This is a quote which I would love to spend a lot of time unpacking, but it's going to take a certain amount of time to unpack. If you actually arranged your essay with this as the subject, it's an awful lot of stuff to deal with for readers. Readers would have to try to feature in toxic masculinity. What is it? What exactly is he talking about? Then they'd have to start talking about white supremacy, and then they'd have to start talking about inequality. And all these things would be bouncing in your head while you're going through Johnson's essay trying to figure out where the focus is going to lie. And you know what this is going to do to your average reader? It's going to confuse the living heck out of them because it's not really how you're supposed to organize an essay. It sounds more like how you would organize a multiple choice test. That ain't what we're doing here. So today we're going to focus on how you get the proper focus for your essay. Not that kind of focus, this kind of focus. And in Johnson's case, he decided to start and put a primary focus on his father, who was a hunter, who was a gun nut, who was emotionally closed. And by explaining what his father did first and foremost, he can then pull out and start to look at the bigger issues because the reader already has a specific item on which to focus. This is what you should be doing in your own writing as well, looking for something specific that will help you talk about the larger issues. Readers need a specific focus. If we were doing journalism, newspaper articles tend to start from the general and move to more specific, but that's because journalists know that the average newspaper reader isn't going to finish the article. They're going to stop partway through, so they give them the most essential information. Then the next nice to know stuff. Then the next nice to know stuff. That's not what we do here in academics. In academics, instead, we start at the specific subject. We put a specific subject in the reader's mind, and then we expand to larger issues as we go along. That is how academic writing works. So it's very important that we get the distinction between specific and general. General, colors. Specific, purple, yellow, red. General, shoes. Specific, running shoes, high heels, sandals. One could argue that that's not really specific enough. Adidas, Reeboks, or specific models. The more specific you get, the more readers can focus on a specific subject. If I was to ask you to write about actors, what are you going to do? How are you going to start that? How are you going to figure out something which the readers can grasp? It's a lot easier if you pick a specific actor. I like Humphrey Bogart. If I told you to write a paper about sports, you're going to be similarly confused because sports is a gargantuan topic and some sports don't resemble other sports at all. How are you going to encapsulate that in 4 pages? You really can't, so you have to go for a specific sport. In this case, quadriplegic tennis. if you ever get a chance to watch the Paralympics, it is some awesome viewing. If I was to ask you to write about laws again is something which is gargantuan, which is huge. People spend their entire lives trying to become fluent in just one area of the law. We narrow it down by picking a specific law, a specific type of law, the stand your ground laws. Stand your ground laws, for those of you who don't know, is in the past, if someone invaded your house was the only place where you had what they called the castle doctrine. You only place where you didn't have to retreat and remove yourself. Everywhere else, if somebody started to try to incite violence, your first job would be to get away. When stand your ground laws started to enter the books, that changed the equation. You don't have a responsibility to try to de-escalate the situation anymore if you're in a stand-your-ground state. You don't have a responsibility to remove yourself from it. You can immediately respond if you feel threatened. Now, the stand-your-ground laws, as you see, there are a few different types, and every state has their own. And again, we're getting to the large subject area. It would be much simpler to focus on a specific one, the Florida Stand Your Ground Law, and we all know why we know the Florida Stand Your Ground Law. Trayvon Martin. It's the example that people will focus on. There are many, many, many other cases, though, in Florida and elsewhere. So you can go looking for a specific subject and then find a good specific example for it. But let's look at it from a slightly different angle. Let's start with an argument and see how you can respond to this argument. There's an article I ran across in The Spectator. American food sucks. Guess what their thesis is? Ella Windsor says that if you don't like picking out, you won't much enjoy eating in the U.S., where the Cheesecake Factory serves portions big enough to kill an ox. Them there's fighting words. But there's a specific argument going on here that American food sucks, and the example this person is using is the Cheesecake Factory. They have set up the Cheesecake Factory as a representative, a sample of American cuisine. Now, how would you respond to this if you wanted to respond to this? How are you going? It all depends on how you're going to engage with the argument. Do you disagree with the claim they're making? If so, you've got a few angles here. I think an obvious one is that all American cuisine is not like the Cheesecake Factory. There are cuisines within cuisines. If you go to Maine, lobster rolls are very much an example of Maine cuisine. Cajun is very much something completely different, and it's an American cuisine. So you'd have to pick a cuisine. I would pick Southern food. I'm a vegetarian, so a lot of this doesn't exactly fit me anymore, but I grew up in the South. I love good Southern food. But it's still an entire cuisine, and it still doesn't give us anything on which to grasp. So I would go specific, and I would go really specific. The shrimp and grits from the Acme Low Country Kitchen, which is a good seafood place in the Isle of Palms, South Carolina. We were vacationing as a family in the Isle of Palms, and we managed to run across this place. The food was amazing. Can you say American food sucks if this is also an example of American food, and it is clearly different than the Cheesecake Factory? By hitting a specific example, it gives the reader something to grasp. If you agree with their claim, though, if you agree with the claim that American food, rightly sucks, you're still going to have to find an example. And for a subjective analysis of something that sucks, fast food would seem obvious. These all look too good to be a suck-ass fast food. They're obviously photo-op foods. So pick a specific real fast food. But still, even with that, you run into a problem in that there's a lot of fast food places. Yeah, I see the Panda Express and Olive Garden on here, and I know you're thinking that ain't American cuisine, but trust me, in China, they don't eat anything that looks anything like Panda Express, and a real Italian would freak out if you took him to Olive Garden and told him it was Italian food. But still, you're still going to have to pick a specific example. I would pick Burger King. This is a photo of an actual Burger King product. I doubt they still have it. This is called the Enormous Omelet Sandwich. Does anything about this look appetizing to you? As I said, I'm a vegetarian, so the whole meat and bacon thing kind of turns me off. But even before I was a vegetarian, one look at this would be like, ew, no thank you. This looks gross as hell. You could pick another example, but this would be a good way to start. You start with a specific subject of analysis. This is proof that American cuisine really does suck. And you examine how this sucks, and then you can pull out to the world as a whole. That's generally how you're going to approach finding a subject, how you're going to approach finding a specific enough subject to write about. You can't write about grocery stores because every grocery store is different. There are tons of chains of grocery stores, and trust me, a Kroger does not look like a fresh market. So you pick a specific store, a specific chain? No, a specific store, and analyze that to see what happens. I go for the Piggly Wiggly. I don't think they exist anymore, which is a shame, because Piggly Wiggly is just so fun to say. Say you want to write a paper about streaming. What the hell do you write about streaming? Is all streaming the same? Is it anywhere near alike? That's a problem, because there are a ton of streaming options. So I would go specific and pick, I don't know, HBO Max. HBO Max, for those of you who have it, the app sucks worse than anything I can imagine. It's slow, it's laborious, it takes ages to load. But I put up with it originally because they had content I wanted to watch. Now they're taking away a lot of content, but that's the kind of thing that's happening across streaming. But if I'm writing the paper about streaming, I'm going to need an example of what's going wrong. And HBO Max right now seems to be embodying a lot of what I see wrong going in streaming. Say you want to write a paper on drinking water. That's simple and safe, right? Well, drinking water is good in some places. It's bad in other places. New York City is renowned for having great drinking water. Flint, Michigan, not so much. So do you go the taste of the water? Do you go somewhere in the process? If you go in treatment, that's a good, obvious place to start. But still, every place treats their stuff slightly differently. There are all different methods at work, different little twists, and that's going to lead to different kind of examples. So I would pick a specific one. I live in Maumee, and when this came out, this really disturbed the hell out of me. Yeah, then they weren't really treating all of their sewage. A lot of it just got dumped into the Maumee River. So now the city of Maumee is having to spend a lot of money, which they don't have, so they're raising our taxes, to build a water treatment plant that actually treats the sewage and treats the water. It's a specific example, but once you go into depth covering what's happening in the Maumee thing, you can then make the argument that it's representative of what's happening in other places. You start with the specific and move into the general. General is big and broad, and it's hard to narrow something. Specific is always better. And that's what you should really pull from the Johnson piece. The Johnson piece started with a specific example, and by the end of it, that quote I pulled up at the beginning was from the very end of the essay. You start talking about his dad, you end up talking about all of the big picture issues. So that's an example of how you can start to take big areas you might be interested in and look at them through a very specific lens. When you do that, you give the readers something they can really focus on, and you then give yourself the ability to not only focus on, give them the information they need to understand that specific event, but then you draw the connections to the rest of the world. This is a model that you should really think about whenever you do your essays. It's why we do the first essay in here. It's why we're going over this. If you ever have questions about your subjects, if you're not sure if they're narrow and specific enough, you can always reach out to me via Remind, and I'm happy to help get you guidance. I'd rather have you with a good subject right away, because it's going to save you a lot of trouble later on. So let me know if you have questions. See you in the next video. Bye, everybody.